To find scalar quantity, a scalar quantity is just a number. Whereas a vector quantity is a number with direction. A contact force is when something affects the force, so something is pushing another body affecting the force, so push. Whereas a non-contact force is applied around, and the most common one is going to be weight. Resultant force is going to be force going in this direction and force going in that direction, so the sum of forces. That could be up, down, that could be positive, negative, forces going in different directions. Mass and weight are different. Your mass stays the same, whereas your weight is dependent on gravity. So if you go to the moon, your mass will stay the same, but since gravity is about 1/10 of the gravity on Earth, you're going to have about 1/10 of the weight. The equation linking weight, mass and gravity is weight equals mass times gravity. The units for weight are measured in newtons, mass is measured in kilograms, and gravity is 9.81 newtons per kilogram. What is the equation linking work, force and distance? Work equals force times distance. I know this is another W, work and weight, both W's. I'm afraid this is just one of the awkward quirks of physics. If I could change it for you, I would, but I can't. The units for work are joules. The units of force, again, are newtons, and the units for distance are meters. They are the same. There is a 1-to-1 ratio. So 1 joule equals 1 newton meter. With an elastic object, up to the limit of proportionality, it is going to keep extending. When it reaches the limit of proportionality, no matter how much force you exert on it, it is not going to extend any further. The equation linking force, the spring constant, and extension is force equals the spring constant times extension. The units for force, again, because they're so important, I'm going to keep repeating this as many times as you need, are newtons. The units for the spring constant are newtons per meter, and the units for extensions are meters. What is the equation linking elastic potential energy, the spring constant and extension? That is elastic potential energy equals half the spring constant extension squared. The units for elastic potential energy are the same as any type of energy. Joules. The units for the spring constant, again, newtons per meter. These are so important. And the units for extension are meters. A fluid is a liquid or a gas. Liquids cannot be compressed, whereas gases can. The equation linking pressure, force and area is pressure equals force over area. The units for pressure are pascals. The units of force, so important again, newtons. And this has to be a capital N. A lowercase n is incorrect and will not get you the marks, I'm afraid. The units for area are meters squared. Distance is a scalar quantity. Displacement is a vector quantity. Speed is a scalar quantity, whereas velocity is a vector quantity. What is the equation linking distance, velocity and time? I'm afraid you're not going to like this one because distance here is s. Velocity times time. Distance equals velocity times time. The units for distance are meters, the units for velocity are meters per second, and the units for time are seconds. From a distance time graph, you can calculate the speed of an object by looking at the gradient of the line. An object can have a constant speed but still be accelerating if it is changing direction. For example, if it's going in a circle. You can calculate distance travelled from a velocity time graph by looking at the area under the graph So here we have a triangle, so that is going to be half base times height, and in this bit here we have a rectangle, so that one equals base times height. If we had another section on here, we would have a triangle on top of a rectangle, so you would have to do for this bit half base times height, and height being from there to there, not height of the whole thing, which is a common mistake people make, and for this bit base times height, and height being from there to there. Acceleration from a velocity time graph is the gradient. The definition of acceleration is change in velocity over time. The equation linking acceleration, change in velocity and time is acceleration equals change in, that's what that triangle means, it's the capital delta. So delta velocity over time. The units for acceleration are meters per second squared. The units for change in velocity are meters per second. The units for time are seconds. The equation linking final velocity, initial velocity, acceleration and distance is final velocity squared minus initial velocity squared is equal to 2 times acceleration times distance. If an object is falling due to gravity, what acceleration does it have? That is 9.8, which is the value for gravity, and then the units of acceleration, meters per second squared. Terminal velocity is the speed or velocity something is travelling at when all forces on it are equal. An object that has zero resultant force in it can either be doing two things. If it is stationary, then it is not moving. If it is already moving, then it is going to be moving at a constant speed. Newton's first law says that an object will stay stationary or at a constant velocity unless acted on by external forces. Inertia is where something keeps doing what it's doing unless acted on by external forces. What are the units of force? That is newtons. What is the equation linking force, mass and acceleration? Force equals mass times acceleration. The units for mass are kilograms. The units for acceleration are meters per second squared. Stopping distance is thinking distance, or reaction time, plus braking distance. It's the time from when you see, for example, if you're driving a car, the time when you see an object in the middle of the road to when your car actually stops. Two factors that can affect reaction time, that can be drinking alcohol, drugs, tiredness. And don't forget to say whether this could have a positive or a negative effect. It is not just enough to say that drugs have a negative effect, because some drugs, some illegal drugs, are going to have a negative effect, makes you feel very drowsy, whereas caffeine is a drug and will actually increase your reaction time. Two factors that can affect braking distance can be the weight of the car, the condition of the road, the tyres, and again, be really clear whether this is going to have a negative or a positive effect. When we're talking about floating or sinking, we need to be looking at the density and the surface area. Pressure is equal to height times density, which is rho. I know it looks like a P, but it's not a P, it's a lowercase rho. Again, I'm really sorry. If I could change this for you, I would, but I can't because I'm not in charge of physics. Times gravitational field strength. And gravitational field strength, remember, is 9.8. The units for pressure are pascals. The units for height are meters. The units for density are kilograms per meters cubed. The units in value for gravitational field strength are 9.8 newtons per kilogram. The law of conservation of momentum is that momentum has to be conserved. So if you're doing momentum calculations, remember your momentum before must equal your momentum afterwards. You cannot lose it anywhere. The equation linking momentum, mass and velocity is momentum. And I know you think I'm messing with you here because I've just written a third P on the page and it's standing for something completely different. I'm sorry, again, if I could change physics for you, I would, but I can't. Momentum equals mass times velocity. The units for momentum are kilogram space meters per second. I know it's really tempting to write kilograms per meters per second, but that is wrong. It is kilograms and then a clear space meters per second. The units for mass are kilograms. The units for velocity are meters per second. Sketch and label a transverse wave. Transverse waves are the ones that go up and down from the same point to the same point, whether that's the peak to the peak, the trough to the trough, the middle to the middle. That is the wavelength. The amplitude is measured from the middle to the top. Our direction of energy is this way. However, our direction of oscillation or movement is up and down. In a longitudinal wave, we have areas of compression and areas of rarefaction. We have the direction of energy going this way and the movement going that way as well. Amplitude is the distance from the middle of a wave to the top or the bottom. Wavelength is the distance between waves. And remember that has to be measured for the same points on each wave. The equation linking time period and frequency is that time period, this time with a capital T, equals 1 over frequency. The units of time period are second and the units of frequency are hertz. There is a capital H and a lowercase z. It has to be a capital H and a lowercase z. If it isn't, I'm afraid you're not getting the marks. The equation linking wave speed, frequency and wavelength is speed equals frequency times wavelength, and wavelength there is lambda. The units for wavelength are meters. The units for wave speed are meters per second. The order of electromagnetic waves: radio waves, microwaves, infrared waves, visible light, ultraviolet light, gamma rays, X-rays. And we have radio waves having a large wavelength, moving down to X-rays having a short wavelength. Radio waves have a low frequency, whereas X-rays have a very high frequency. Radio waves have low energy, and X-rays have very high energy. Radio waves can be used for communication. Microwaves can be used for communication or cooking. Infrared is going to be that little red button on the end of your TV remote control. Or it can be used for heat sensing. Visible light is going to be used in cameras and film. Ultraviolet can be used for security purposes, for example on notes. Gamma rays can be used for cleaning or treating foods and instruments to kill bacteria. Or for cancer treatment. And X-rays are used for seeing broken bones. When a wave is diffracted, it spreads out. For example, a wave coming through here is going to go through a short, small gap and then spread out like that. When it is refracted, it changes direction. And the reason it changes direction is because the wave is going to be changing speed as it moves from one medium to another medium. Which surfaces absorb radiation? That is going to be dark, matte surfaces, and dark surfaces also emit radiation. When you place like poles next to each other, they are going to repel. When you place unlike poles next to each other, they are going to attract. Materials like iron are magnetic. The direction of the magnetic field is from north to south. You can change the strength of electromagnet by changing the current or the length of wire. Magnetic flux density is the magnetic flux in an area. This is a rather nasty equation, I'm afraid. The equation linking force, magnetic flux density, current and length. Force equals magnetic flux density times current times length. I know it's really confusing the fact that we have a capital I and a lowercase l in there. The units of force are newtons, the units for magnetic flux density are teslas, the units for current are amp, and the units for length are meters. The equation linking voltage at the primary coil, number of turns at the primary coil, voltage at the secondary coil, and number of turns at the secondary coil is voltage at the primary coil divided by voltage at the secondary coil equals number of turns at the primary coil divided by number of turns at the secondary coil. The units for voltage are the same as they are anyway, that is going to be in volts. And then the equation linking voltage at the secondary coil, voltage at the current at the secondary coil, voltage at the primary coil, and current at the primary coil is voltage at the secondary coil times current at the secondary coil equals voltage at the primary coil times current at the primary coil. Moment is equal to force times distance. The units for moments are Newton meters, force newtons, the units for distance are meters. If an object has balanced clockwise and anti-clockwise forces, then it's going to remain balanced, nothing is going to happen. If your clockwise and anti-clockwise forces are unbalanced, you're going to have a turning effect, it's going to be moving. What is the equation linking velocity, force, changing velocity and changing time? The equation for that is force equals mass times change in, remember delta means change in velocity, over change in time. With a converging lens, we are going to get a real image, and you're going to use a converging lens if you are long-sighted. A diverging lens should be used if you're short-sighted. And a diverging lens is going to form a virtual image. Magnification is calculated by looking at the image heights and dividing that by the object height. And it's a trick question here because there are no units for magnification because it is a ratio. Order of light in the visible spectrum is red, orange, green, blue, indigo, violet. If an object is opaque, it means you can't see through it. If an object is transparent, it means you can see through it. If an object is translucent, you can see light but not shapes. It's kind of semi-transparent. When light passes through a filter, certain wavelengths of light are going to be absorbed and not get through to the other side. Sound waves travel in longitudinal waves. The range of human hearing is 20 Hertz to 20 kilohertz. A P wave is a primary wave, it's longitudinal. And it's going to be fast and travelling through liquids and solids. An S wave is a secondary wave. It is a transverse wave that goes through solids only. Give the order of objects in the solar system. In the middle we have the Sun, then Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. We also have an asteroid belt and a dwarf planet in between Mars and Jupiter. Poor old Pluto, who isn't a planet anymore but just a dwarf planet. Some more dwarf planets. And a load of random objects floating around the edge. A galaxy is billions of stars held together by gravity. The life cycles of small stars and large stars start off the same. They're going to be a cloud of dust and gas. Then they're going to be a protostar, turning into a main sequence star. And then a small star is going to be a red giant, and then it is going to fizzle out to be a white dwarf or a black dwarf. A large star is going to be a red supergiant. It's going to undergo supernova, and then it's going to turn it into a black hole or a neutron star. What happens at the centre of the star? We are going to have nuclear fusion. A natural satellite is something like the moon that we didn't create, it just goes around by itself. An artificial satellite is one that we created. How does an object maintain its orbit? For that to happen, it actually needs to be travelling really fast. How can an object change velocity while speed remains constant? That is when it's changing direction or moving in a circle. Redshift is when wavelength gets longer. Blue shift is when that wavelength gets shorter. Redshift can provide evidence for the Big Bang because it shows that stars are moving away from us.